A viral video, a royal guard's silent response, and the message that followed. Welcome to Tales and Truths, where extraordinary stories unfold right before your eyes. Today, we dive into an incident that stirred the internet and shook the royal world. A simple TikTok video led to controversy, public debates, and a powerful lesson in silence. But first, let us know where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from you. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss our next intriguing tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned for tomorrow's story that's sure to captivate your heart. It all started with a video, a simple TikTok clip that soon became a viral sensation. The setting was Buckingham Palace, where a royal guard, standing motionless in his ceremonial uniform, went about his usual duties. But this time, something unusual caught the attention of the public. The video featured a logistics officer in the royal uniform, standing a few steps away from the guard. He was mocking the very essence of the guard's role with a grin plastered on his face. "What kind of job is this?" he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Standing still like a statue and still getting paid." The clip was short, perhaps, only 30 seconds long, yet it carried a powerful message. It was meant to be a light-hearted joke, but it quickly became the focal point of heated debates. The video was shared across social media platforms, sparking an uproar that reverberated across the world. Within hours, the video surpassed 2 million views, and the comment section exploded with opinions from every corner. Some people laughed along, agreeing with the logistics officer's playful remarks. Others, however, were outraged. They couldn't understand why anyone would disrespect a man who had dedicated his life to upholding a centuries-old tradition of honor and discipline. As the video continued to gain traction, it seemed as though the controversy was only growing. A divide formed among viewers. Those who had never truly understood the role of the royal guard found themselves in agreement with the logistics officer. They saw standing still for long hours as a pointless task, an antiquated ritual in today's modern world. But for the majority, the video represented something far more serious than just a harmless joke. It symbolized a deep disrespect for tradition, the military, and the very essence of service. The backlash was swift. Veterans from both the US and the UK took to social media to voice their displeasure, posting videos in response to the clip. "You stand still not because you're weak, but because you control everything inside," one veteran wrote. "It's a display of strength, discipline, and mental fortitude that only a few can truly understand." Many shared stories of their own experiences, shedding light on the mental and physical demands placed on those who serve in roles such as that of the royal guard. For them, it wasn't about being a statue. It was about embodying control, precision, and dedication to a centuries-old tradition that required unwavering discipline. But despite the rising tension, the royal guard in the video did not respond. He stood as he was trained to, silent, unmoving, and resolute. To an onlooker, there was nothing extraordinary about his stance, nothing to suggest that this was anything more than the usual change of guard. But in reality, there was something different about his posture. If you looked closely, you'd notice that his body was ever so slightly tilted, just 0.5 degrees to the left. It was a small deviation, almost imperceptible to most, but it was enough to catch the attention of his superior officers. To anyone who had been trained in the ways of the royal guard, it was a subtle yet significant sign. This slight tilt wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It was a coded signal, a silent message designed to alert those in charge to a potential internal threat. This small movement had been trained into the guards as a means of communication when speaking or reacting wasn't an option. In this case, the royal guard had not broken his silence, but he had quietly signaled that something was wrong. The video, it seemed, was more than just a viral clip. It was the beginning of something much bigger, an investigation into the guards' actions, and ultimately a revelation that no one had anticipated. And so, this small moment in history, this seemingly innocent TikTok video, set off a chain of events that would soon unfold in ways no one could have predicted. The story wasn't just about disrespect for a job. It was about the silent strength that the Royal Guard embodied, and the discipline that guided his every movement, even in the face of ridicule. The aftermath of the TikTok video was nothing short of explosive. As the clip spread like wildfire, the reactions from the public were divided, with opinions flying back and forth across social media platforms. Some viewers stood with the logistics officer, laughing at what they perceived as an outdated, laughable tradition. "What's the point of standing still all day? It's not even a real job," they said. They couldn't understand why anyone would take such a simple task so seriously, thinking it was little more than a relic of the past. But the majority of the reactions were far less amused. A storm of anger began to brew, and the public quickly shifted from bemusement to outrage. How could someone so deeply disrespect the traditions of the Royal Guard, an institution that had been around for centuries? People began to post their thoughts online, and soon the debate wasn't just about a single video anymore. It had turned into a nationwide conversation about the value of tradition, duty, and respect. Veterans from both the United States and the United Kingdom entered the fray, sharing their perspectives on what it really meant to serve in such a role. "You think standing still is easy?" One ex-soldier wrote in a post that went viral in its own right. "It's not about the body, it's about controlling your mind. The strength to stand motionless for hours, in the face of distraction, in the face of mockery, is something you can't just understand if you've never done it. That guard isn't weak. He's holding it all together inside." Veterans spoke of their own experiences, of standing guard under harsh conditions, of fighting against their own instincts to break composure. For them, the Royal Guard's silence was not just part of the job, it was the essence of his strength. The outrage continued to grow, fueled by a rising tide of support for the Royal Guard. The online world buzzed with clips and memes, some mocking the logistics officer, others defending the Royal Guard's position. Yet through all the noise, the guard in the video remained silent. He did not flinch, did not engage in the debate. His face, as always, was a mask of stoic resolve. And in that silence, something powerful lingered, as if his very inaction spoke louder than any words ever could. But what the public did not know, what no one realized, was that this silence carried a message hidden in plain sight. The slight tilt of the guard's posture, just 0.5 degrees to the left, had not gone unnoticed by his commanding officers. To the untrained eye, it was nothing more than a minor deviation. But to the officers in charge, it was a code, a signal, a warning. The guard's subtle shift in position was a carefully trained signal, one that he had been taught to use when speaking or reacting was not an option. It was a silent form of communication, a lifeline in moments when words couldn't be spoken. Within hours, an internal investigation was launched. The officers, now aware of the odd posture, reviewed the footage. The logistics officer, unaware of the unintended consequence of his actions, was now under scrutiny. It didn't take long for the team to realize who the culprit was. The man who had filmed the video. He was a logistics staff member, someone who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the guard that day. As the investigation continued, they uncovered more troubling details. The logistics officer had a history of making inappropriate comments in internal forums, comments that disrespected the Royal Guard's duties and the traditions of the palace. It was clear now that this was no simple joke. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine the integrity of the Guard. The Royal Guard's silent response had triggered a chain of events that none of them had seen coming. And when the final verdict was handed down, the logistics officer was fired. But the most shocking part was that there would be no public announcement, no headlines. It would be a quiet resolution, a simple final note in the history of the Royal Guard. And so, while the world continued to debate, the story of the silent guard remained. His quiet defiance had spoken volumes. His unwavering posture had sent a message to everyone watching. Silence, when wielded correctly, could be the most powerful weapon of all. As the investigation unfolded, the tension continued to build, and the public's interest in the Royal Guard incident didn't fade. What had begun as a seemingly innocent TikTok video quickly escalated into a matter of national importance. News outlets, social media influencers, and even ordinary citizens were riveted by the unfolding drama. While some continued to argue over the video's merit, the royal guard's silent reaction was beginning to take on a deeper significance. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but in doing so, he had sent a message far more profound than anyone had anticipated. For those in the know, the guard's subtle deviation in posture, just a half-degree tilt to the left, was not just a minor mistake. It was a message. It was a code, a signal, a deliberate action that only those trained in the ways of the royal guard would recognize. And this detail, which might have been easily overlooked by the untrained eye, was now the key to unlocking the true story behind the viral clip. Inside the palace, the chain of events was unfolding rapidly. The officers in charge were keenly aware that this wasn't just about a viral video anymore. It had become a case of discipline, honor, and the hidden communication methods that defined the royal guard. They pored over the footage, watched it frame by frame, and analyzed every minute detail. What they discovered was chilling. The logistics officer, the man who had filmed the now infamous clip, wasn't supposed to be in that area at all. He had no business being anywhere near the guards, let alone mocking them on camera. The investigation revealed something even more troubling. The officer, it turned out, had a history of disrespectful behavior towards the royal guard. He had been reprimanded before for making snide comments about the guard's role and the duties they performed. This wasn't the first time he had crossed a line, but it would be the last. The officers were now faced with the reality that this wasn't just a harmless prank or an innocent misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to undermine the honor of the royal guard and the very institution he represented. As the days passed, the public reaction grew even more intense. The defense of the royal guard was now a full-blown movement, with social media campaigns, video responses, and public statements from veterans. "We stand by the guard," they said. His silence spoke louder than anything we could ever say. The very discipline that the logistics officer had mocked was now being hailed as a symbol of strength, resilience, and mental fortitude. People who had once been indifferent to the royal guard's role were now beginning to understand the deeper purpose behind it. They realized that the guard's silence wasn't a weakness. It was a form of strength. He had maintained his composure in the face of ridicule, and in doing so, he had become a symbol of what true discipline looks like. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the investigation had reached its final stages. The logistics officer, oblivious to the ripple effects his video had caused, was about to face the consequences of his actions. He was called in for a meeting with the commanders, and within hours, the decision was made. His contract would be terminated, but the most surprising part of the entire ordeal was that there would be no public announcement, no media coverage, no press release. It was to be handled quietly, behind closed doors. As news of the officer's termination spread, among the staff there was an overwhelming sense of relief. The decision was swift, but it was also a testament to the strength of the system. It wasn't about public humiliation or scandal. It was about protecting the honor of the royal guard and upholding the standards that had been in place for centuries. The palace had spoken without ever uttering a single word. The message had been clear. Respect for tradition, discipline, and honor was non-negotiable. And so, as the dust began to settle, the world moved on. But the royal guard's silent stance would not be forgotten. His simple, controlled action had done more than any statement could. His response wasn't loud, but it was definitive. In a world that often values words above all else, sometimes silence is the most powerful voice of all. As the investigation into the logistics officers' actions progressed, the tension within the palace grew even more palpable. The whole affair had taken on a life of its own, now far beyond a mere viral video or a simple act of disrespect. The royal guard's silent posture, that 0.5-degree tilt, had ignited a firestorm, but it also became the key to unlocking something much larger, a hidden code, a form of communication that few understood, but those who did knew the significance. It wasn't just about discipline or tradition anymore. It was about uncovering the depths of respect for the system that had been so deliberately tested. In the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace, where every detail was scrutinized, the officers in charge were fully aware of the gravity of the situation. They had watched the footage over and over, dissecting every frame, trying to understand the full extent of what had happened. The logistics officer, a seemingly insignificant figure in the grand scheme of things, had somehow managed to push the boundaries of what was acceptable within the palace walls. The small act of mocking the royal guard, the recording, had triggered something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. And now, it was clear that this wasn't going to end with just the firing of a disgruntled employee. The deeper the investigation went, the more troubling the details became. It wasn't just the fact that the logistics officer had filmed the video in the first place. It was the disturbing pattern of disrespect he had shown towards the royal guard in the past. He had openly mocked their role on multiple occasions, dismissed the significance of their duties, and, most alarming of all, he had a history of making derisive comments about the very essence of military tradition. This wasn't just a one-off incident. It was part of a growing disregard for the institution he had been a part of, and that was something that couldn't be overlooked. The more they dug, the more the officers began to realize that this wasn't simply an issue of an employee crossing a line. This was a clear violation of the principles that held the royal guard together, a deliberate act of defiance against something much larger than a single man or a single video. It was about the integrity of the entire ceremonial institution, the respect for the traditions that had been passed down through generations, and it was now clear that it couldn't be ignored. As the investigation continued, the logistics officer became more and more aware of the situation he had created, but he remained eerily silent. He had no idea that his seemingly innocent prank would spiral out of control the way it had. While the world outside continued to debate the incident, the officers inside the palace were putting the pieces together. It became clear that this was not just an isolated event. This was a symptom of a larger issue, an erosion of respect for the very thing that made the royal guard what it was: discipline, honor, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. The decision was made swiftly. The logistics officer's contract would be terminated. But this wasn't going to be a public spectacle. There would be no media coverage, no sensational headlines. The royal guard's silence had already spoken volumes, and now it was time for the system to act without fanfare. His termination was a quiet resolution, handled with the same dignity and respect that had been shown throughout the entire ordeal. But it didn't end there. The true power of the royal guard's silent defiance was not in the punishment meted out, but in what it symbolized. It was a message to everyone that the institution of the royal guard would not be disrespected, that tradition would not be tarnished by one man's arrogance. It wasn't about the officer anymore. It was about protecting the honor of an institution that had stood for centuries, and the message had been sent loud and clear. The public, for the most part, never knew the full details of what transpired behind the palace walls. But they didn't need to. The viral video had already revealed the heart of the matter. The royal guard's strength wasn't just in their physical presence, but in their ability to remain unmoved in the face of provocation. And now, the palace had proven the same thing. Even in the face of mockery, they had stood firm, silent, resolute, and unbroken. The investigation had been handled with precision, and the lesson was clear. Respect for tradition, for duty, and for honor was non-negotiable. As the days passed, the silence surrounding the royal guard's response to the viral TikTok incident seemed to grow louder. The media, ever hungry for a story, had moved on to the next trending topic, but the story of the guard and the logistics officer was far from over. Behind closed doors, the palace had quietly settled the matter. The logistics officer had been fired, but the decision had been made with such stealth, so little fanfare, that the public was left in the dark about the true nature of the consequences. No press releases, no interviews, no public apologies. It was a message that spoke volumes, without a single word uttered in return. In the aftermath, the debate that raged across social media had started to wane, but a few key players in the story were still grappling with the fallout. The logistics officer, whose joke had spiraled out of control, was left to deal with the repercussions of his actions. He hadn't anticipated how far his prank would reach, nor did he expect the seriousness of the reaction from his superiors. When the call came to terminate his contract, there were no cameras in his face, no dramatic showdowns. It was simply a quiet meeting, a swift resolution, and his career with the Royal Guard came to an abrupt end. The public may not have known the full extent of the story, but those within the palace understood that it was about far more than just a joke gone wrong. The logistics officer's termination was handled with precision, but the real message lay in the way the palace had dealt with the incident. There was no public statement, no fanfare, just the cold, efficient action that spoke louder than any apology or reprimand could have. In a way, the Royal Guard had done what they were trained to do, remain unmoved, unaffected, and resolute. In doing so, they had sent a message to the logistics officer, to the public, and to anyone else who dared question the tradition of the Royal Guard. This institution would not be undermined. It would not be mocked. And the men and women who upheld it would not be swayed by external pressure or ridicule. As for the logistics officer, life went on, but it was clear he would never fully escape the consequences of his actions. The palace had acted swiftly and decisively, but the damage had been done, both to his career and to the reputation of the Royal Guard. There was no way to undo what had happened, and no way to unring the bell that had been sounded with that viral video. He was out of a job, and while he might move on to something else, the stain on his reputation would linger for years to come. Meanwhile, the public had moved on, but the lesson had not been lost on them. As the story faded from headlines, the Royal Guard remained. Their silence, their discipline, and their unwavering commitment to their duties had been the real lesson here. It wasn't about the viral video anymore. It wasn't about the logistics officer or his mockery. It was about something much deeper, the respect for an institution that had stood the test of time. The Royal Guard's actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. They had shown the world what true strength looked like, not in words, not in actions, but in silence. And for the logistics officer, there was no redemption. His firing had been swift, quiet, and decisive. No drama, no public spectacle. But perhaps that was the point. In the end, the Royal Guard's strength lay in their ability to remain silent in the face of adversity, to stand their ground, and to let their actions speak for them. And in the quiet resolution of this matter, they had done just that. The world may never know the full extent of what happened behind the palace walls, but the lesson had been taught, loud and clear. Silence can be the most powerful response of all. As the finality of the logistics officer's termination began to settle in, the story seemed to fade from public consciousness. The viral video that had sparked the entire controversy was now relegated to the archives of social media, but the quiet strength of the Royal Guard remained etched in the minds of those who had witnessed it. There was something almost poetic about how the situation had unfolded. No public spectacle, no dramatic outbursts, just a firm, silent resolution that echoed louder than any words could. But the deeper lesson, the one that wasn't fully appreciated by the public, lingered in the air like a heavy truth. Silence, when wielded with purpose and control, is not weakness. It's not indifference or fear. It is, in fact, a form of power, a power that those who are truly disciplined understand all too well. The Royal Guard had exemplified that lesson in their response to the video. They hadn't needed to say a word, yet they had communicated everything that needed to be said. The logistics officer, in his arrogance, had thought that mocking the guard was a harmless joke. What he failed to realize was that he was challenging something far greater than just a person. He was challenging an institution, a centuries-old tradition that had survived wars, scandals, and time itself. And it wasn't going to crumble over a few unthoughtful comments. Behind the scenes, the commanders knew that the officers' actions had been more than a trivial matter. They had seen this type of disrespect before, albeit in smaller doses, but this was different. The video had gone viral, yes, but it had also sparked a chain reaction that could have threatened the very integrity of the Royal Guard. The calm, controlled actions of the palace leadership, acting swiftly but quietly, had sent a powerful message to everyone who had been watching. They weren't just protecting a tradition. They were showing the world what true power looked like. It wasn't in grand declarations or public outcry. It was in the quiet decisions, the unspoken words, and the ability to remain resolute even in the face of public mockery. The logistics officer's fate was sealed, but there was no fanfare surrounding his departure. His termination was announced without any major press coverage, no interviews, no sensational headlines. His career with the Royal Guard came to an abrupt end, but the reaction from the public was telling. There was no public outrage, no rallying cries from his supporters. Instead, the majority of the public had quietly moved on, accepting that the Royal Guard's decision was final, that justice had been served in its own silent, dignified way. But for those who had followed the entire ordeal closely, the real takeaway was more profound. The Royal Guard had done what they were trained to do: stand firm, remain silent, and let their actions speak. In a world that often demands quick reactions, sound bites, and bold statements, the Royal Guard had shown that silence could be a form of strength. And in this case, it was the silence that made the loudest impact. In the end, the logistics officer's mockery had failed to break the Royal Guard. Instead, it had only illuminated the power of the system. The officers who had quietly handled the matter behind the scenes had proven that the Royal Guard was not just about the men who stood at attention outside Buckingham Palace. It was about the legacy they represented, the strength of tradition, and the unwavering commitment to uphold that tradition, no matter the external pressures. And as the weeks passed, with the story gradually fading from the headlines, the final, poignant message remained: in silence, there is power. And sometimes the strongest response is the one that doesn't require a single word. We've just gone through a powerful story about the Royal Guard's silent strength, and we want to hear from you. What do you think about the Guard's response to the viral video? Do you believe silence in the face of provocation is a true display of strength, or do you think something more outspoken should have been done? The way the situation was handled, without any public spectacle, shows a deep commitment to tradition and discipline. But is this approach always the best one? We know that stories like this spark strong opinions, so we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand your ground without saying a word, and how did that turn out for you? Or perhaps you disagree and think that sometimes words and action are needed to truly make a statement. Drop a comment below and let us know where you stand. And if you're enjoying this kind of storytelling, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We've got more captivating stories, real-life lessons, and gripping moments coming your way soon. Be part of the conversation and share your thoughts with us. We can't wait to read what you have to say.